Hello and welcome back to the Palmer Performance Workshop. I know it's been a while, but I had a spare bit of time, so I thought I'd do a new video for you guys. Let's take a look and see what we've got in this week. So we have got this lovely 2023 Kawasaki ZX10R, which is somebody's track bike. The customer's track bike doesn't get used on the road, hence the slicks. Now, obviously a lot of the time on here you'll see full-on track bikes that have had everything done to them, but this one's fairly standard. It's just had a decat, still got a standard can on it to help get it through the noise regs, but basically there's a few little things on this bike which he feels is holding him back on track, so that's what we're going to rectify here. Now, the first one to talk about is the standard throttle on the ZX10. So these actually have cruise control built into them, and part of that system is they have this sort of area of negative travel, which I believe is for cancelling the cruise control. So that's where the throttle stop is there. But then you see it's got that little backwards bit of throttle, and he doesn't like that. So, and also if we were going to use it for racing, that's something that we're trying to rectify. Now, there are a couple of options on that front. So Graves Motorsport, which is an American-based company, they actually make a new billet throttle tube, which does away with that. But we looked into that, and by the time we got it over here, I think they're about $100, $120. But by the time we got it shipped over here, paid the customs charges, the VAT and all that sort of stuff, it ended up quite expensive just for a throttle tube. So we've gone a different route. Bike Sport Development, they are a UK company that make race switch gears and throttle housings. So this is a new throttle housing, and basically we take the standard throttle housing apart, take the throttle sensor out of it and the throttle tube, and basically fit it into this. And this gives it a solid stop and also makes it a little bit more robust in the event of a crash. Now, obviously that hasn't got any switches on it, whereas that has. So basically what happens is it then gets split into two separate units. So this is the new switches, and they will mount onto the back of the brake master cylinder. So that's one of the jobs we've got to do. Now, the fun bit with that is that all the wiring for that actually plugs in right under the tank. So we have to have the tank off, the airbox off, and then we can access all that wiring. And obviously we've got to strip all this out. So that's pretty straightforward. Right, the next issue that he has with the bike is the standard electronic steering damper. She gets a bit wobbly down the straights. Now, I have actually used these electronic steering dampers on race bikes, but it's kind of a bit of a rider preference thing. Some people get on with them, some people don't. There is actually like a race ECU that you can get for the steering damper. They have a little control unit which sits under here on the side of the airbox, which kind of stiffens up the damping. And I think there are people out there that will convert them to manual operation as well. So they take this little servo out of the end and replace it with a manual adjuster. But we're just going to take it off. Obviously, the moment we disconnect it, it would then throw a fault code up on the dash. So we have to fix that. And so what we've got for that is a Heeltech steering damper eliminator. So that literally plugs in place of the original steering damper little control unit. They are around about the 50 quid mark. So we've got that to plug in. And then we've gone for a YSS steering damper. YSS are a pretty good brand, really. There are you don't really see so much of it over here, but certainly in Europe, a lot of people use YSS for their race suspension. But the steering dampers are really good value for money. They work out at just under a couple hundred quid, and they're a proper twin chamber design with decent adjustment and stuff. So we've got that to put on as well. Next thing he was having an issue with is the ABS kicking in. He tends to ride at Cadwell more than anywhere else, and he was finding he was having issues with the ABS kicking in there. So the easiest way to get rid of that and improve your braking feel is with a set of race hoses and taking off all the standard ABS lines. Now with the ZX10, I believe there is actually a dongle you can get which you can plug in, which will turn off the ABS, but obviously you've still got all the ABS pipework and all the long lines and the standard rubber lines and stuff kind of interfering with your brake feel. So we are just going to bypass the whole system. So we'll drain that down. You've seen me do that plenty of times before on previous videos. So we will drain that down, put the new hoses on, bleed them up, and obviously you'll then have a direct connection to the calipers without it running all the way through the ABS pump. The ABS pump itself is just hiding under there. That will stay in place as per normal. you can't disconnect it because the wheel speeds and stuff run through it. You can get bypass plugs, but we tend not to use them because they can be a little bit unreliable. So that's that. And then the last little job we've got to do is change the gearing. Fortunately, these bikes aren't like the Hondas where you change the gearing and they get upset. It doesn't matter on a ZX10. You can change the gearing and they'll be perfectly happy with it. So standard gearing is a 17.2 front with a 41 rear, which is a bit long for track use. So we've just got a 16.2 front to put on, and that'll sort that. And then the last job we're going to do is just sort out the rear brake caliper. So we've got haven't got it yet, but we've got a bracket coming, which will basically retain the rear brake caliper on its hanger so that when you take the wheel out, it doesn't fall out. And then there's a couple of little mods we'll do to the caliper itself, where just to make sure the pads don't fall out when you're changing wheels. He's already got captive spacers in there, so that makes the job easier to start with. So, but yeah, that's a rundown of what we're going to do on this bike. And yeah, let's get cracking, start getting it stripped down. So here we are, tank off. Always looks like a bit of a snake's wedding under here, especially on the standard road bike loom. This is the steering damper ECU. So that's what the heel take unit's going to replace. I'll just slot in there. And if we look, so the steering damper has a little wire that plugs in there. Okay. And then that wire, we will just cable tie that up out the way, because we won't need that anymore. And then steering dampers are ready to go. Security Torques on here, so you might need a special tool to get them undone. It's got to have the hole in the middle. So, right, let's get on with that. And then you can see the ABS lines. They run all the way around here, so we actually do need to take the airbox off fully, like we said, to get to the switches and stuff. So that's the next thing we'll do, is just get the airbox off and out of the way and get on to actually cracking on with the job. Okay, so we've got the airbox off, and I've actually taken the throttle bodies off as well, just to improve access, because the pump and the hoses is kind of well stashed down there, and there's various clamps and stuff that hold the pipes in place. But the front ones aren't too bad, they just run up the side here, but the rear ones they kind of tuck down and go down and round, so it's going to be a bit of fun getting them out. But I think next job we'll do is just get the system drained down with the old vacuum bleeder, and we can start thinking about taking the hoses off. So you guys would have seen my vacuum bleeder set up before. It's basically a Sealy vacuum bleeder, but I've actually attached a little 12-volt vacuum pump to it, and it does a really good job of draining down these ABS systems and getting as much fluid out as possible, so that when you do disconnect the lines, you don't end up with a mess everywhere. With that done, I just decided it'd be time to get the throttle out of the way, because obviously the brake lines is kind of up around that area as well. So we're getting that stripped out, and we'll put that to one side, ready to assemble into the Bike Sport Development's housing. Now just moving on to the back with the vacuum bleeder again. I'm just looking at the best way to get those hoses out of there, because it's all very sort of tight and stashed away behind the rear sets and the subframe, etc. As you can see there, I'm using a proper brake spanner, which is for undoing sort of brake pipe nuts. You'd normally use it on a car. It actually came out of my garage tool set for the car. But the ABS brake pipes, they're quite tight generally where they go onto the unit, and a proper spanner makes all the difference when you're trying to get them undone. So you may now be thinking, why the hell have I just removed the Swingarm main pivot bolt and the top shock mount? But there's a good reason for that. This ABS pipe here is actually bolted on the inside of the frame, and the Swingarm gets in the way of it. But by undoing the top shock bolt and pulling the main pivot out and then just popping the front sprocket off, it then enables me enough room to actually get to that bolt. Now, I have, when building race bikes, I have managed to get those out without taking the swing arm out, but it's not really a very nice thing to do. So for the sake of a couple of minutes, just pulling the main swing arm bolt and the front sprocket off, which we were going to do anyway to change to the new one, that's the best way to do it. So we'll just get that bolt undone, and that's the rear lines out of the way. The rear lines connected to the front bit, or the most accessible bit of the ABS pump, so and to get them out of the way first before we can then disconnect the front ones, which are just behind it. So moving ahead quite nicely. A little bit fiddly getting them out and around, and then get the swing arm back in. A little bit awkward lining it all up, and then obviously get it all torqued up. There's a couple of different procedures here with the main swing arm bolt on the ZX10. There's kind of a thrust adjuster, so you have to wind that across and torque that up to a certain setting, and then you torque up the main nut on the left hand side and then the lock nut on the right hand side, and job is a dream. Now that's done, we can get the new front sprocket on, obviously making sure to bend over the lock washer, and then we can move on to getting these front hoses out of the way. Again, all quite fiddly getting in there, but that's all part of the fun. Onto the front lines now. There is actually a union up under the radiator, but sometimes they just don't want to undo, and this one didn't, so it meant I needed to take the whole sort of front line assembly there out in one piece, which became a bit of a delicate threading act, but out it came. Now with that one out of the way, we move on to the hose from the master cylinder. There we go, that's that one out of the way, and the bracket that sort of held it all underneath at the top of the rad can come out as well. With that all off, we can then look at getting the front hoses on. It's a two-line system. It's just a ZX10 kit that the customer had already bought. One line is obviously longer than the other to go to the left-hand caliper, which is further away from the master cylinder. And as you can see, we're just bolting them on at the caliper end. We'll do that on both sides and then feed them up to the master cylinder and look at the best way to route them. Obviously we want to make sure, especially with things like speed sensor cables and such like, that they're retained in the right way so that they don't stand any chance of getting damaged. Now just sorting the connections up at the master cylinder, and occasionally you have to rotate the banjo ends to get the alignment nice. Following Hell's instructions on how to do that. And obviously once we get these hooked up, we want to make sure that there's plenty of clearance when you turn the handlebars from lock to lock, and that nothing fouls anywhere. Just getting the alignment perfect there, and then we'll get the double banjo bolt with 3 copper washers and get that screwed in and nipped up. A little bit fiddly sometimes, and then just finding the sort of right angle for the hoses to sit at without getting in the way of everything. You can see there, just checking lock to lock, making sure I'm happy with it. The rear one, of course, is a lot more straightforward with just a single hose. I'm just routing that through the hugger. Again, just aligning the banjos the right way, get that all connected up, and then obviously sort out the routing for the speed sensor cable and plug the hydraulic brake light switch back in. Well, what a fun job this is. But anyway, the old lines are off, the new lines are on. We've just got to do a bit of tidying up. So the original sort of clips which hold the speed sensor wires don't fit the aftermarket hoses, so we'll just cable tie them up. The front, this is just a set of generic ZX10 race lines. Normally I tend to get custom ones made. If you can see down there, it's a 2-line setup rather than the one, well, rather than the H-line setups I prefer using. But it'll do the job. I just need to tie them up nicely there. I'll probably use a standoff, a bit of rubber hose with a cable tie around it. And then under here, originally there was a clamp for that. speed sensor wire, and what we'll probably do is put a P-clip or something through that brake hose and that, and then cable tie that one up as well, so they're nice and tucked away. But yeah, all on, just basically get those bits tidied up and get some fluid into it, get them all bled up, and then we can look at sorting out the throttle housing and switchgear and getting it back together. So I decided we'd get the throttle sorted. Now, to take the original throttle sensor out of the housing, you have to have a tri-lobe screwdriver, which is a bit of an oddball thing. But if you buy a set of security bits, they generally have one of those in there. It's a little bit of a fiddly operation taking it apart, but Bike Sport Developments give you some good instructions that go with it. So we've got the throttle tube in there, we've got the sensor pushed in there, and then it's just a case of kind of assembling it all together with the screws and such like supplied. That's the other side of the housing going on, and as you can see, it's all good to go. Well, that is much better. Got that billet housing on there, and you can see we've not got the negative travel anymore, so it just works like a normal throttle. Like we said, as part of that kit, we've now got the switches on it. It does have an option there to have a rain light, but obviously this bike doesn't have a rain light on it, so that is not being used. And then you've just got all the normal switches, but just in a nice racy style. So that's all on, that's all plumbed in under there. It means we can now put all the airbox and everything back on, and then get the brakes bled up, steering damper on, and that's about it until we get the bracket for the rear caliper. And now we can get the steering damper fitted up, making sure it moves freely, doesn't restrict lock-to-lock movement, and setting it somewhere where we think it'll be right for the customer to start. Now my brake fluid delivery has arrived, we can crack on with bleeding the brakes. I always do the rear one first because it's the easiest one to do and kind of puts you in a good mood for bleeding up the front. As you can see, I've got the vacuum bleeder on it, and I'm just letting that suck the fluid through the hoses and topping up the reservoir as we go. Once I've got a decent bit of fluid through, I'll then switch to manually bleeding it, and it's normally a pretty quick job. And now onto the front lines. Fill up the reservoir, suck some fluid through using the old vacuum bleeder, both calipers, and then normally what I'll do is then do a bit of manual bleeding up at the top of the master cylinder to make sure we get any air out of there, and give it a fairly good bleed up from that side before then switching back to the calipers. Now, ultimately, a lot of the time, the air does end up at the top of the master cylinder, so that's always the last place that I'll bleed. But then just getting happy that there's no air down in the calipers, doing both sides again, and then I'll switch into one final bleed at the top until I'm happy with how the lever feels and I'm confident there's no more air left in the system. Once I'm happy with that, I'll then use a bit of rolled up tissue to take any residue out of the bleed nipples and then top up the reservoir accordingly, making sure not to overfill it. So jobs list getting fairly well ticked off now. We've got the steering damper on, got the nice switchgear and throttle without the negative travel. Brakes are all on and nicely bled up. Bleed nipples cleaned out and such like. So our last job is to sort out this rear wheel. Now obviously we changed the sprocket earlier for a 16 tooth, and that was when I took the original sprocket off so I could move the swing arm to access that bolt for the rear ABS line. When I did that, I didn't bother readjusting the chain because obviously I knew I was going to take the wheel out. So one of the things we've got to do when the wheel's out is adjust the chain tension. And then this is what we've got to fit. Now, this bracket is from MSS Performance. If you own a Kawasaki, you almost certainly would have heard of MSS. It's a company that I've used and sort of had dealings with for a lot of years. Great bunch of guys, but they make a lot of products for Kawasaki's and other bikes. They're an importer for Spark exhausts as well. But these brackets they've been making for years for various Kawasaki models. And basically what this does, if I just come down here, is it replaces that axle block there. And then this bracket part on the back then bolts up onto the rear brake caliper hanger. And the idea of that then is it keeps the caliper in place. So when you take the wheel out, it doesn't just fall out of the way. And then what we do once that's all fitted up is I normally put a spring in between the pads here to keep them apart so that when you can't sort of knock them out and lock wire the back bit in. So that's what we're going to do now. Get that fitted up, do the chain tension. And then aside from dropping a bit of bodywork back on that side, it'll be good to go. So axle nut off first and take out the standard axle block. Now I've taken out the bolt for the speed sensor, got the MSS one in, and then obviously I can take the wheel out with the caliper staying where it is, as you can see there. Now I've just disappeared off to my garage, which is actually also used as a dirty room, so there's a grinder in there. And what I've done is I've just chamfered the back edge of the pads, which will just help guide the disc in when the wheel's going in. I've now just refitted the pads with the spring and lock wired the back part of them so they can't get knocked out easily. Now I'm just removing the chain guard because that kind of just gets in the way when you're trying to change wheels, so hopefully that should make it a lot easier for the customer. And then I'm just going to put a little bit of clear vinyl onto the swing arm where you'd sort of hook the chain over when you're changing the wheel, just to protect it so it doesn't get any scratches or whatever when he does change wheels, just like that. So this now I'm just having a fight with my lock wire tub and just lock wiring in the back part of the pads. That's the issue when you put the spring on the front part, it does then tend to push the brake pads up the other end, so you kind of have to lock wire them in. And there we go, the wheel literally just rolls straight in and away we go. Now I'm just setting up the chain tension and wheel alignment with that 16-2 sprocket, making sure it's absolutely spot on. Get the wheel torqued up, get the safety clip back in, and the job is a dream. And the final job, putting the standard bodywork back on, which is the most hateful job you can ever imagine on a ZX10. Lots of hidden little clips and fixings and bolts and whatnot. It's a real pain. But anyway, once that's all back on, the last thing you'll see me do is just plug into the onboard diagnostics plug on the back of the bike, make sure that there are no faults recorded or anything from stuff that we've had taken off and put back on, and then a final little wipe over. And there we go, all back together, quick wipe over, and ready for its next track day. Big fan of ZX10s really. They might not be as fast as some of the other bikes, but they've got such a sweet chassis. The engines are really reliable on them. The gearbox is a cassette gearbox, so if you have a problem, it's easy to take out without stripping the whole engine. They are just a real sweet, well-developed bike. And yes, I might be biased because I've worked with Kawasaki a lot over the years, but what a little sweetheart. Hopefully the customer will be happy with the mods. He'll find a couple more seconds out of his lap times around Cadwell Park, and maybe we'll see it back for some more tweaks in future. In the meantime, thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe. Hope you've enjoyed that video. I'll catch up with you soon.